What's up, world? It's your boy Mike Muse. Welcome to the conversation of the Mike Muse Show. I am super excited to be in conversation with my next guest. As you know, I've been dealing a lot in conversations around the quadrant and the importance of us voting quad. And you just heard from our previous guest, David, his experience that he went through within the criminal justice system. And when I really got to that quadrant with him talking about the judge and how did the judge handle the jury instructions, was he and his defense team comfortable and happy and satisfied with the remarks that were giving and the instructions? And you heard his response. And that led us to a whole dynamic of really validating the mission of the quadrant, which is to pay attention to elected judges because they have the ability to really decide not decide, but to influence a jury's deliberation in terms of how they should rule and judge the case. So I wanted to bring a judge on as a result of that to really talk and walk us through the dynamic of a judge and the importance of a judge and the importance for us to be able to elect a judge. Couldn't get, for all the obvious reasons, a judge who is currently on the bench. So I wanted to make sure that I had a retired judge. And thanks to my boy Jonathan, shout out to Jonathan P., I have found the best judge, I think, that is perfect for us to lead this conversation, this dialogue, because of her background, because of the fact that she comes from the South, which plays into a whole different dynamic and element, because of the fact that she's a Black woman, because of the fact that she didn't focus on criminal justice, criminal judiciary, but she focused on family and everything else not related to crime. And that is something that I really want us to consider as we're thinking about our judicial candidates and judges, is that they rule on more than just decisions that are based on criminality, right? And so they rule on so many other things that are important to communities and marginalized communities. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you to my new friend, Judge Patricia D. Weiss, who's a retired judge from the 5th Chancery Court District of Hinds County, Mississippi. What is happening, Judge Weiss? How are you this morning?
I am wonderful. The weather is good and life is good here. So I am wonderful. Very excited to speak with you this morning.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to be in conversation with you. I just want to salute you for your years of service on the bench. You first got elected to your judgeship in 1989 and you just retired in 2019. So I salute you for an incredible career that you had on the bench. As you know, you and I talked previously, ladies and gentlemen, I have made myself her adopted son, just so you know. I've already invited myself over for Thanksgiving dinner. But just like as I told you, I'm from the North. I'm born and raised in Michigan. Now I live in New York City. And so there's always been, I call it now, this false security of equality, right? This false security that racism really isn't existing, right? I kind of walked around in a bubble, right? But there's something about the South that's always jarred me. Right? The South has always jarred me of like Confederate flag, slavery, like racism, the Ku Klux Klan, like aggressive, like sicking dogs on Black protesters. Like those are things that I invoke, unfortunately, Judge Wise, to this day as a Black man thinking about the South. So with that being said, we talked about the microaggressions that come into a courtroom. Why is it important, you believe, for more Black judges to be in the court system in the South in particular, where you are?
Very good question from a position that when I took the bench in 1989, there were probably, by that time, Judge Anderson had moved on to the Supreme Court, and there were maybe 4 Black judges in the state of Mississippi at that time. And the importance of being a Black judge and why we need more, which we do have a lot more now. As a matter of fact, my daughter, when I retired, ran for my position and won. So I'm very excited about that.
Yay! Shout out to my new adopted sister.
I think Black judges come from a perspective of understanding many of the litigants that are in their courtrooms from a different perspective. They understand what it's like to have certain issues that many times non-minority judges or white judges don't face. For an example, when I first came to the bench, most of the judges, what I call, were from the Leave It to Beaver type family. Although, and in the South, they were reared where mom stayed at home, dad went out and made the money and had cookies baked and the food on the table when they came home. But for myself and my colleague, Judge Denise Owens, at that time, we understood what it was really like to be a working mother and a mother who had children. And we also understood, which was a great thing, what it was like to have a strong husband, a strong father figure in the home. And we understood that Black men, if you will, were not all trying to avoid paying child support or supporting their children or doing anything of that nature, because we had seen the other side and we had witnessed the other side.
Well, let's just go there because, as I introduced you, you didn't rule on cases dealing with criminal matters. So I do want to get your opinion on that a little bit further in the conversation. But since we're here, I want to talk to my audience just really quickly, Judge Wise. Audience, I've always talked to you about the importance of judges in relation to criminal justice, but even beyond the criminality of it, the role that a judge can play on other matters of the court that just doesn't involve criminal issues. And this is why it's important to have judges who are just not Black, but who are empathetic to the Black experience and empathetic to marginalized communities and the experiences that we go through. So just talk to us a little bit why that's important. And if you could even, give us an example of a case that you may have had to rule on, or why it was important to have a judge sitting on the bench who's empathetic to others' narratives, who's empathetic to other lived experiences, right? Who's empathetic to Black people and to marginalized communities.
Well, I think one good example I'm going to revert back to, since now I'm a grandmother of 6, to even understand the role that extended families play in our community and in other communities, why it's necessary and why it's needed to have extended families who are willing and wanting to be a part of a young person's life. And that when we would have people who perhaps wanted to come into court and for whatever reasons, and some were valid, some were more valid than others, who wanted to say, okay, I don't want little Johnny to be a part of my husband's family. I don't want him to be a part of my ex-husband's life. I didn't like him, so therefore I want to take this child and raise this child on my own, and if you quote unquote as a mother only, which I do applaud mothers who where it's necessary to rear a child on their own, but to be able to explain to both parents that it's not about you in this situation. The divorce may be or the paternity action may be, but let's focus in on what this child needs. And I think most people would agree with me that if possible, children need both parent involvement in their lives. And I used to have them, and I still do. When I would have young people come into my courtroom, I would treat each one, I would view each one as if they were my grandchildren or if they were my children and what I would want for my children. And as I mentioned to you on the other day, I really truly believe that every child ought to have an opportunity to have the best childhood they could. If we think back, we probably all can refer back to things that happened in our childhood that shaped us today. Some of the very things that we perhaps did this morning out of routine were things that we learned, things that we observed in our childhood. So I really believe that if you have the best childhood that you can have as a young person, I think that just creates an adult teenage human being that is going to have a good, positive, progressive outlook on life. And
so you're inferring for me two different emotions and thoughts right now based upon that statement. They're two divergent thought processes, but they're both connected. One is school to prison pipeline that I'm thinking about. And then the second one that I'm thinking about right now is this narrative of the Black man, and how the Black man has been shaped to be inadequate. How we are shaped in society as not being wanted to be in the home, as not being wanted to take care of our families, or this narrative of a deadbeat father, right? And there is historical narratives that talk about the Black man's removal from the household due to housing policies and regulations from HUD, right? And so all these things. And I've never thought about centering a judge in that conversation, right? I've always thought about it centering it from a policy related to HUD, a policy related to economics, economic policy, job creation, which is all important. It all ties in. But I think hearing you talk right now, Judge Wise, we've left out the role a judge can play, and either breaking up that system or repairing restorative justice in the Black family. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, you mentioned giving you some examples of some of the things that may have now, these cases have been ruled on and resolved, and this young person is now an adult, I know. But I had an instance where mom just, for all the reasons that may be legitimate, was not in a good relationship with the young man's father. The young man's father was a award-winning bass fisherman. He had boats, he had this, he had that, all the things that he wasn't a rich person, but that was his passion and his love. And it was so ironic to me that part of her argument was, I don't want, and I'm going to call him Little Johnny, to spend any time with his father. And to me, I could not understand the concept, and because I observed, and my perception would be a father and son out fishing, being able, not the fishing of itself, although wonderful, I'm sure my husband loves to fish, but the conversations, the interaction, the teaching that could be learned from that experience and that hobby that they both could enjoy without it being a problem to anyone. It would be a positive thing. And so not to take her from a negative standpoint, but to sit down with her. Quite frankly, we went into chambers and talked about it. We talked about two things. The fact that he would have time to learn this fishing experience and husband's passion for fishing, but heck, it would give you a break. He'll be gone all weekend. You'll have some time to yourself. So let's look at this from a positive standpoint, and everyone can benefit. And so at the end of the day, she and I both, including father, were able to work out something that was, in my opinion, was very beneficial for all around. And it was just a feel-good feeling once we just sort of put down the barriers and just talked about how the focus is going to be on something other than the anger that we may have for each other for legitimate or non-legitimate reasons. But let's just try best to put that aside.
Ladies and gentlemen, you couldn't see me smiling because I wanted to make sure that I stayed quiet, because you know how Zoom works. If I was react, it would take away from Judge Wise. But Judge Wise, I mean, you make my heart smile, honestly, because you are affirming why I created a quadrant, but in particular, the square for the judge. I talk about it from a narrative of you, when you're a judicial candidate, you can't ask a candidate questions on how they would rule a case because the evidence hasn't been brought in front of them. And they have to rule the case based upon the Constitution and the law, and they can't determine that until they see everything. But I talk about you should ask questions to the candidate that will infer lived experiences, that will give you the understanding of the character of the judge, right? And so you just explaining that and how you talked about, you look at them as your grandchild or one of your children when you're thinking about it, and how you took that mother into the chamber and you inferred your husband, who fishes. That is the lived experience that I'm talking about, ladies and gentlemen, of the importance of understanding a judicial candidate's constitution and how they would rule and how they would conduct that courtroom. That right there is a quadrant. That right there is why we need to pay more attention to judicial candidates. That right there is why we need to ask questions that will give us the candidate's lived experience. And Judge Wise, you mentioned fishing, and I mean, you should know you already were right in your verdict and how you ruled and how you gave counsel to that mother. But even in my own personal experience, I am a fisherman. I love to fish. And you just brought back these emotions and visuals I have of fishing on the bank with my father, with my uncle, and with my grandfather, right? And so you had like this multi-generation, and my mom would come along, and some of the women in our family would come along too as well. But that was the crux of it, right? And you talk about the bonding. I mean, we would be up from like sun up to like sunset, right? Out there fishing, and just, I was a little boy, but just absorbing the stories from these older Black men, right? And just by listening and how I was learning. So with that, Judge Wise, now I want to go to the issue. I wrote a piece about, school to prison pipeline. Well, I didn't write a piece about it, but I wrote a piece where I brought up the school to prison pipeline, in particular for Black boys. And if we're not proficient in reading by the end of third grade for a Black boy, how when we enter fourth grade, that can put us on a trajectory for higher rates of high school dropout rates. And then that leads to other things, which ultimately may lead to us doing some type of criminal activity that can lead to the prison pipeline. But it all starts from adolescence, which you just mentioned. Talk to us about the importance of having a judge who is empathetic to the Black experience and empathetic to marginalized communities, who will be on the bench sitting across from someone who's in your courtroom who may be a young Black boy, a young Black girl, or a young person who comes from a marginalized community, and why that's important to make sure we can prevent that school to prison pipeline.
Well, I think one of the things that terms that I like to use, and I guess I may have borrowed a little bit from Black Lives Matter. I didn't have these words to it, but words matter. Words matter. And what do I mean by that? As a judge, when you have litigants in front of you, even those who are represented by attorneys that may look like us and may not, you're speaking to the litigants. And so what you're telling them, and when you have maybe someone in your courtroom who may be delinquent in support or maybe delinquent in whatever it is that their obligations would be, the first thing I used to tell, especially men, I don't consider you the bad guy. You're not the bad guy. Let's look at what we're dealing with in this situation. Sometimes there's a situation where a obligating parent may be obligated to pay much more support than they literally, realistically can afford. And not that no one should neglect the obligation of taking care of their children that they put on this earth, but they also should have some reasonable way of fulfilling those obligations in a reasonable manner. So what we do is we look at the fact that when we look at expenses, those persons are paying the same prices for gasoline, for food, for groceries, for all the other things that we all have to pay. We take that out of the way, and then we look at what's left, what's discretionary, and let's look at what we can do to make this palatable for everyone concerned. Not only the obligating parent, but the parent who is receiving the support. How can we work this to make sure that we're all doing the best we can with the resources that we have? Because it makes no sense to obligate someone to pay a dollar amount of monies when in fact they are not in a position to earn that money to pay. So what does that do? I don't know about anybody else, but I know when most people, when they owe people money, they don't like to go around those persons. They like to sort of be aloof and not in a position to be asked where's the money. So then that leaves the child, the mother, and everybody else with no ability to spend any time with dad or with mom, because mothers do pay child support in certain instances. So two things, getting back to Trey a little bit. You have to, a judge has to encourage the litigants that they're not walking into a courtroom that is perceived to already be stacked against them, and that there is a notion that you don't have value. Every person who comes into a family law courtroom has value. So where would the ball be dropped, if you will? That's where you try to get to the exploring how can we manage this to the best situation that we can, so everyone can walk from this courtroom feeling as if they've been heard and they have been listened to, and that somehow their situation has some meaning and resolution.
That's so powerful, Judge, because an audience, and the reason why I brought that up is because we've heard from so many other white judges who go and talk to white youth and white children differently. And you've heard the cases, you come from a good family, right? So how can I punish you, right? You're going to be successful. You're going to go to Stanford. You're on the swim team. How can I punish you, right? And so it's happening, folks. So I'm definitely doubling down on Black and marginalized communities, but I'm saying that with intentionality so you can hear the counterbalance of what white judges say to white children, and the opportunity in their lived experiences and what they're bringing in as a white judge sitting on the bench, looking at a white family who may look like them, who they may go to the same church. They may be part of the same university alumni system. They may go to the same country club, right? They may go to the same grocery store or Walmart, whatever the case may be. It's a connectivity. It's something they can relate to. Black life or marginalized community, they may not be relatable. So that's how they rule. And so, Judge, I hear those statements. It just infuriates me that a judge will say that.
Well, words matter, and I can tell you, and it's not just me. I want to say other judges try as well. I know my daughter does, and I know other judges, my colleagues. But I can't tell you over the 30 years how many graduations I've been to, how many class day, how many football games. Because what you do when you have not the children don't testify in court very often in my court. But you tell parents, okay, are you a member of the PTA or the PTSO? Because I was a card carrying, if you will, member of the PTA from the time my daughters were kindergarten all the way through first grade. So one of the things, okay, now I want you to join the PTA. When are they having their next game? I'm going to be there around 7:30. Look for me, and we'll sit together, and we'll do this, and we'll do that. So I sum a lot of that up with what you just said about being part of the community and having accessibility and encouraging.
Judge Weiss, I mean, that is just the importance of this. And, audience, as you're looking at judicial candidates, coming up on your ballot who may not be of color, may not be Black, may not come from marginalized communities, you can still ask them these questions to see if they can be empathetic and if they can understand that perspective. They don't necessarily have to come from the community, but we need to make sure that they understand the community. And I think that's the most important thing. Judge Wise, I mean, I can't tell you how happy I am about this conversation because it just really highlights the importance of a judge, right? It just really highlights the importance of a judge beyond just police misconduct, beyond just police brutality, but the judges really are the centerpiece for restorative justice when it comes to the Black community, right? And what you're talking about is restorative justice from a holistic perspective, right? And restorative justice for the Black man who is always demonized at this big boogeyman, right? And this big threatening man, or this overly sexualized man, or this very hyper masculine man. With that being said, Judge Wise, the last question I have for you, because we didn't talk about it directly, but I just want to hear your direct answer to this question. Why is it important to elect a judiciary candidate who is empathetic to the Black experience in marginalized communities when it comes to criminal matters of the court?
I think it's just the understanding of how a person could get to be in a situation to be before a criminal court judge, to just understand that you didn't wake up that morning and decide I'm going to go commit some criminal act, that there were factors that sort of layered on each other that got you to, and I hate to use desperation, but got you to a situation that perhaps you thought you had no choice. That's not everybody, but that's, in my opinion, a good bit of a lot of, especially young people, and especially young people who are still in that quasi youth court, adult court situation, when society tells us that we need to have the best sneakers, we need to have the best this, we need to go to the best that, then you sitting there with very little resources to acquire what you're measured by, that sometimes you make a poor decision that shouldn't necessarily affect the rest of your life.
Wow. That's a perfect way to end the show. I dare not add any more commentary on top of that. Judge Wise, thank you for bringing your lived experience to the judiciary branch. Thank you for the lives you have impacted and that you have touched over the years. Thank you for restorative justice as you provided to the Black community and to the South, who needs it so bad, as we all do across the nation, to the country. Salute to you and all the work that you've done. I look forward to having you come back on the Mike Muse Show to do more conversations regarding this. Tell your daughter I said hello. Welcome to the bench. Welcome to her new role. She has a heck of responsibility and shoes to fill, but I'm sure she is up for the challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, please give me a virtual round of applause for Judge Wise in your car, at home, wherever you may be listening to us right now. And that is our show, folks. Hit me up at I am Mike Muse, MUSE. If you have any questions regarding this, or always vote quadrant.com. Until next time, peace.